Thanks.
We're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Jake, are we on? I'm going to go ahead and call this November 19th, 2018 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming. Sorry we're running just a few minutes late. We had a long work session this evening. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and ask Rob Perro to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thanks very much, Rob. We will move on to our communications from the public. We do have 3 public hearings scheduled for this evening. If you're here to participate in those hearings, please hold your comments until those hearings are called. Otherwise, if you'd like to bring anything to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity. Any public comment tonight? Any public comments? Not seeing any. I'll stay with the public. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? Any volunteer board reports from the council? We'll start with Richard.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it's not necessarily a volunteer board, but I did have the pleasure of participating in the Fire in the City forum last week. I thought it was very informative. There were between 60 and 70 people in the audience. But I want to stress to the listening public and those in the audience that we are not immune to fire in the city here in Whitefish any more than the people in Paradise, California. As Chief Page pointed out, and as I also pointed out at the forum, that once a fire comes in out of the forest, we're now in a situation where our homes become the fuel source. And so instead of trees to trees, it's now home to home. And I hope that one of the things that I talked about, I hope, is that we'll take another look at some of our building standards, perhaps some of our zoning requirements in terms of adaptability as a fire-safe community, and one that's more resilient towards fire because, as I said, we're not immune, and at some point I think it's not a stretch to expect some kind of a fire event here in Whitefish or very close to us.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for your time participating on that panel, and to Chief Page as well. Further volunteer board reports from the council. Katie.
Yes, this is more of an announcement on behalf of not only Whitefish City Council, but the Whitefish Strategic Housing Committee. This morning in Helena, the Montana Board of Housing met to decide who would be the lucky individuals and projects to receive LIHTC or low-income tax credit, housing tax credit, throughout the next year, and we actually were granted the award. So we were granted $7.7 million to help build 38 units for low-income housing tax credit projects, and this was on behalf of the Whitefish Housing Authority, who teamed up with Homeward, based out of Missoula. They've been working on it for quite a long time, and they're really excited to get the ball rolling for building this project. They're anticipating the timeline for completion to be around 2020 as of now. There were 17 applicants, 5 were chosen. We were one of them. So we've been down this road quite a few times, and we're finally getting a project done, so we're very excited.
Indeed. Thanks, Katie, for the update. Great news, certainly. Further volunteer board reports? Not seeing any. We'll move on to our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the November 5 meeting minutes, or can I have a motion for approval? Frank?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Hennon. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us on to our first public hearing of the evening, which will be item 6A, ordinance 18-37, an ordinance amending the planned unit development for lot 16 at the Riverview Meadows subdivision, and this will be on a first reading. Wendy.
Good evening. Okay, so the request before you is an amended preliminary or PUD to increase the density on lot 16, which is a multifamily lot from 18 units in 3 buildings. The original request was for 24 buildings in 1 building. You did receive an updated letter from the applicant regarding some work that they did with the neighborhood. But I thought I'd go through the staff report and then we can talk about what their update is, which was just last week that we received that. So this is a proposed increase of 6 multifamily units. Back in 2016, the council approved an ordinance approving the Riverview Meadows subdivision. The entire subdivision, which was 17 lots, included 13 detached single-family homes along the Whitefish River, 10 attached townhouses fronting Whitefish Avenue extension, and 18 multifamily units to the east of the Marriott Hotel and west of the townhouses. The project density was about 6 dwelling units per acre. In 2017, the council approved final plat and it was recorded. All the improvements are complete. Acres Lane was constructed, the extension of Whitefish Avenue, Bonita Circle serving the single family homes. The Whitefish River Trail was constructed, and if you haven't been out there, it's a really beautiful extension of that trail. And several single-family homes have been constructed. No building permits have been submitted for either the multifamily portion or the townhouse portion of the project. So these folks are asking to add 6 additional multifamily units to lot 16. Originally, they're proposing to construct them all in 1 building, which is the site plan that you have up there, instead of the 3 separate buildings which were originally approved. Access and the parking will remain the same. In this original request, they proposed to move the building towards the north end of the lot and still maintaining all the required setbacks and providing a larger open space area for the residents to the south of the building. The overall density is 6.89 dwelling units per acre. The project's located at 306 Acres Lane. The site is undeveloped. It's served by all public services and facilities. We did notice adjacent landowners and put a legal in the pilot. We did receive 1 letter in support, and then 4 additional letters came in kind of right around the time of planning board with folks that were in that neighborhood to the east that were concerned about the design and the compatibility with the neighborhood, concerns about future requests for changes, additional traffic, and there was reference to a private agreement. We reviewed this according to the criteria in the zoning regulations for PUDs. Under the zoning regulations, it does appear to meet all the setbacks, which again will just be confirmed at the time of building permit. The density is a little bit higher, of course, 6.8 dwelling units per acre. This subdivision and this lot in particular has 2 zoning districts. WR1 is the majority of the lot, and there's a little sliver of WB2. But they're not blending the zoning designations, but because they're going above 4 dwelling units per acre, they are required to provide the affordable housing, which is why they're providing 1 additional affordable housing unit as part of this project. Because they're changing the size of the bedrooms or the units from 2 and 3 bedroom down to studio and 1 bedroom, they actually don't need any more parking for the additional 6 dwelling units. So the 41 spaces that they're providing with their site plan still is meeting all of our standards. As is required for all multifamily projects, they'll have to get architectural review, and they'll have to have their buildings look different from one another. They can't all look exactly the same. Under the PUD review criteria, just to hit a few of the highlights there, under the current site plan, or the originally proposed site plan, they were increasing the open space over the original project. So while the open space under the 3 building design was convenient to the residents, this larger, more usable open space with saving a number of matured trees would have been even better. Protecting the quality and characters of the existing neighborhood, when you folks approved this project originally, you really took into consideration where that existing single-family residential neighborhood was, and this doesn't change that. So single-family homes are located along the river next to an adjacent single-family home, and the density increases as it gets closer and closer to the commercial areas. The multifamily is more than 300 feet away from that existing single-family neighborhood, which is about a standard city block. The property is infill, it's served by all public services and facility, and it is providing much needed rental product in our community, which, as you recall, our needs assessment says we need 580 rentals by 2020. There's no incompatible uses within this neighborhood that would warrant buffering. And they did not do a traffic impact study because the traffic is less than 200 trips for this minor amendment. They did do a TIS with the original entire subdivision, including the Marriott, and MDT will determine if warrants are met to ever require a light at that intersection. But as it is right now, warrants haven't been met, and so no light will be installed at this time, and it's unlikely that the addition of 6 additional apartments would warrant a traffic signal. There's no changes to any of the pedestrian or bicycle facilities. Again, the site plan is going to remain essentially what you originally approved back in 2016. So our condition, we're proposing to amend condition number 20, which was the affordable housing component aspect, to enter into a deed restriction for those units. The project does comply with the growth policy, including transportation, pedestrian, bicycle, and affordable housing. So the planning board held a public hearing on October 18th. The applicant's representatives spoke at the hearing, and 4 members of the public spoke, 1 in support of the request and 3 neighbors that identified concerns, and again identified an agreement that the neighborhood had with this developer. The planning board made a number of motions for approval and denial, and finally they did ultimately approve the application. And they really wanted me to point out that it was not an easy decision for the planning board. They were pretty concerned about the neighbors, and they really wanted the developer and neighborhood to work together. So while the vote was unanimous, it took a long time to get to that decision. So they did direct the neighbors and the developer to work together before coming back to the council meeting. And so that is in your packet. So on page 120 of your packet, which I'll also put up on the screen here, is a revised site plan showing the 24 units in 2 buildings versus 1 building. So the request, and you have a letter from the developer as well as a letter from Tom Tourneau representing the HOA for that neighborhood, indicating that this is what the neighbors would prefer to see, is 2-story building, 12 units in each building instead of 1 building that could be bigger. Just a couple of things to point out with this particular design. The open space, it still, meets the open space requirements, but it is a loss of open space versus the single building. It's a little over 3,000 square feet that is less open space, which is about a downtown city lot, one of those 25 by 130s. It is a loss of trees because there is a number of mature trees on that southern part. The site plan that the applicant put together kind of pointed out some of those trees that they were looking to save. And you will be locating with the new design. The residents of that southern building will be closer to Les Schwab, which is a commercial use, and then closer to the west of that building is the pool for the Marriott. So you will be locating folks who are going to be living in those places closer to those areas that could be noisier and maybe a different type of living arrangement. So I just wanted to make sure we pointed those 2 things out. And then I guess if this is the design that ultimately gets approved, we will need to make a minor amendment to the proposed condition, which is condition number 20, that the affordable units would be dispersed throughout the buildings, plural, since now there would be 2 buildings. So can I answer any questions for you? And the applicant is here as well to answer any questions. And I also have a Google map, so if you wanted to look at the bigger neighborhood.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? Frank?
Wendy, you said that this The initial presentation, when it was just one building, and even now, you're saying we're getting one additional affordable housing unit, yet I'm reading this to say there are 5.
Right.
There were 4 already included in the original
Correct.
plan? Okay.
Yeah, so now we're going to get 5.
Okay. And to the extent that the developer and the neighborhood have made, created something they think they want, does this council or this body have a choice in deciding whether or not we want one design versus the other?
I think it is ultimately up to you.
Further questions for Wendy? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 18-37, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Bruce, are you here representing the applicant, or Michael, would you like to, as the applicant?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Morton. I live at 101 Lakeside Boulevard in Whitefish. I am the managing partner of MK Enterprises, who is the applicant before you tonight. I submitted a letter for your packet, kind of reviewing the history and our position being here tonight, and I won't go through it again. But I did want to just comment on one thing I said in the last paragraph. I indicated that your approval of this application would increase the number of units in the affordable housing category. And I should have used the expression workforce housing, because we're not really increasing affordable housing that is going to the Housing Authority. But I meant that by eliminating 3-bedroom units and adding 1 and 2 unit and studios, we're increasing what I would consider the workforce housing element of the project. Although the planning department unanimously approved the project last month, there was such a vehement objection to our proposal from the homeowners of River's Edge that we did contact them after the hearing and listened to their concerns and had a back and forth, and actually came to an accommodation wherein they said that they would support 24 units in 2 buildings of 2 stories only. And we determined that that could still work for us, and that's why you have a kind of a revised proposal here tonight, because we want to be good neighbors. We want them to support us, and so hopefully that this will make it a win-win situation for everybody. And the last comment I would make is that although we're increasing the density by 6 units, we're actually reducing the number of bedrooms by, I think, 10 is the number that's been calculated. So we're actually improving congestion and traffic concerns that neighbors or others might have by having fewer bedrooms in the project. With that, I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thanks, Michael. Any questions for Michael? Richard?
Yeah, I'm a little confused now because originally we had 4 affordable units.
Correct.
And you're telling me now that we still have 4 affordable, but the 5th unit is not necessarily an affordable unit, but a workforce unit.
No.
Is that, did I misunderstand?
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't explain it very well. We've already committed 4 units to the Whitefish Housing Authority. If you grant our application tonight for the 6 additional units, we will devote 1 of those units to the Whitefish Housing Authority.
Okay.
That will make a total of 5. I was merely referring to with the workforce housing, I was merely indicating that we're increasing the number of smaller units that fit more in the workforce housing category.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Further
Thanks.
questions for Michael? Frank?
Michael, is it am I reading this correctly? What you've done is you've taken and split a 3-story building into two 2-story buildings. Is that correct? Is
Yes.
that what's essentially, and the neighborhood was more concerned with the height?
Yeah, they were concerned with the mass
Okay.
of one building. Even though it sits right behind the Marriott Hotel, they still had a concern that it affected the residential character of what they wanted the neighborhood to look like.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Further questions? Thanks, Michael.
All righty, thank you.
Public testimony this evening. Bruce, anything to add? Okay. Further public testimony. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion. Andy?
I would go ahead and move to approve WPUD 18-05 findings of fact and staff report as recommended to us by the planning board, and I can speak to that after I get a second.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Andy?
Actually, I won't speak to it. I'll just go ahead and make a couple of motions for, one motion for amendment here. I would move that we amend condition 20 as suggested by staff to include 5 affordable housing units. That we add a condition number 29, and that condition would read that. Okay, yeah, we can do one at a time.
Those individually?
Sure.
So we'll take a friendly amendment to condition number 20, which would increase the number of affordable housing units to 5. Is there a second to that friendly amendment?
Second.
Motion has been seconded. We will vote on the amendment. Further discussion on the amendment to condition number 20. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Andy?
And then I think it would be condition 29 would be an additional. Didn't we stop at 28? Or was it, did we stop at 29? I can't remember. I think my notes were correct or not.
It would be 30.
30.
So 30 would be the next one. Okay, so then we would move to add a condition 30, that building design shall be in substantial compliance with the building design submitted with our November 19 packet on page 120.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Might have to clean that up, Angie, but I'm not sure how we do it. But
Basically, it just makes reference to the two building design versus
two building
single
design, correct.
structure. Is there that was seconded by Frank? Michelle? Further discussion on that friendly amendment to add condition number 30. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. That carries unanimously as well, Michelle, which brings us back to the original motion for approval as amended.
And I have one more amendment to add a condition number 31 that would prohibit short-term rentals.
Is there a second to that added condition number 31?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Hildner. Further discussion on that friendly amendment. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously. Michelle, for added condition number 31. Further amendments?
None.
Okay, thank you, Andy.
Speak to it very quickly, though.
Back to our original motion for approval. Andy?
Just want to thank Bruce, Mike, and Rob for going back to the neighborhood and coming up with a solution that worked for them and makes our job a lot easier.
Certainly does. Oh, Richard?
Yeah, I would just second that, because at the planning board, as I was sitting up here and the discussion was going back and forth and back and forth, and voting was going back and forth and back and forth, it was my fervent hope that everybody would have a chance to sit back and talk it one more time. And that conversation began just as soon as everybody left that door. And I could see right from the beginning that both opponents and proponents were anxious to find some middle ground. And I think that speaks well to the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously as well. Michelle, thanks for your time this evening. We will move on to what will be ordinance 18-38, adopting amendments to the city's impact fee ordinance on a first reading. And we will also hear resolution 18-44, approving amendments to the rates and policies for impact fees assessed by the city of Whitefish. You have Dana's staff report included in the packet on page 189. We will hold one public hearing, but I will require separate motions for both the ordinance and the resolution. Dana.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The ordinance is found on page 123 of your packet. The resolution is on page 136, and my staff report is on page 189. So in January of 2018, the City Council awarded a contract to FCS Group to review and prepare an update to our impact fees. We've had numerous meetings, work sessions, and I've touched base with the council throughout the year about where the project was going and where the recommendations were. The final report was provided to the city on August 27th of 2018. However, we've taken time to very carefully review the city code and review other items that have come up, such as our recently adopted capital improvement program that was changed at our last meetings. That update to our CIP for the water fund significantly changed the projects that were included. That impacts our impact fees calculation. And so in doing so, I prepared an addendum that is included in the packet that recalculates the water impact fees. With that, I've prepared the maximum defensible amount, not the amount that you actually have in resolution, in the prepared resolution. So while the impact fee report and the addendum provide us the necessary documentation to update our fees according to Montana law, we do have flexibility in the implementation of those fees. So based on previous council direction, the water impact fee is proposed to remain at the current rate, and the paved trails impact fee is proposed to be increased from the current rate up to 50% of the maximum defensible amount over the next 5 years. I've only included the single year, though. We are not approving the increase for the next 5 years, just simply this year, because I think what we'll be doing is bringing back the water impact fee too, as we find more solid numbers to use. Those are going to be the two that we'll have to reconsider probably within a year or so. So our current impact fees for a standard home, single-family home with 33 fixtures for water, 27 for wastewater, would be about $6,659. The proposed rates would now increase that amount to $7,972. That's a $1,313 increase. So that is a 19.7% increase. However, it's important to note that impact fees have not been materially adjusted since 2007. So when you look at the 11 years that have gone by, that's about a 1.8% increase per year. And the cost of construction obviously has increased as well. In total, when you also look at that $1,300 for a home of $350,000, that equates to about a 0.4% increase in the cost. So just to give you some figures. Also, in comparison to other communities, our rates would still remain comparable. We would be almost $2,000 less than Kalispell. We would be about $1,100 lower than Bozeman. And City of Columbia Falls does not have impact fees, but they have connection fees. So I didn't do a comparison there because impact fees are regulated by the state more closely than a connection fee. So we do continue to recommend the effective date of January 1, 2019, which is included in the resolution. But in addition to the resolution and the rates after this 5-year update, we also had to take a good look at the ordinance. It hasn't been updated for a while because the rates really haven't changed that much. Unlike other fees within the city, the rates were included by ordinance into the city code. It makes it difficult to update rates in the future. So to address that, we have pulled out the rates in the city code, and instead we'll set them by resolution like we do every other fee at the city. Furthermore, there are a couple other changes that I'd like to bring to your attention in the ordinance, which on page 127 of the packet. You'll see that I did remove the section that refers to affordable housing dwelling units. However, that section actually is referencing the PUD chapter, and it references plant investment fees, not impact fees. So while it was included in this section, it is not truly applicable at this point. Montana law is silent on whether or not you can waive or defer impact fees for affordable housing units. Some states explicitly state that they can waive impact fees, but of those, about 50% require a different funding source to cover the impact fees. So as we look forward to how to address affordable housing with impact fees, I think that's a good task for the Housing Committee to look at, but really, in my mind, there's two options: getting something done at the legislature, which will take a long time, if we can get anything there, and then, or looking at other funding sources to help with impact fees. So at this point, though, I have removed it. There's quite a bit of cleanup throughout the ordinance. The only other major section that was pulled out was the independent fee calculation section. This was a section, when I read it, that I felt was very arbitrary. Talked to our attorney, and she also agreed. The Montana law requires that you have a service area report that supports your impact fees. So the idea that somebody could come in and calculate a new impact fee with their own data was a bit confusing to me, why we had it in the code. So I'm recommending that we remove that section. And just to, other than the increases or decreases in impact fees, it's important to note that paved trails and the park maintenance building will now have will now be assessed on commercial property as well as lodging facilities. So included in the packet is the study that supports these changes, as well as the addendum I prepared. And staff respectfully recommends that the City Council adopt what would be Ordinance 1838 and Resolution 1844. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Thank you, Dana. Any questions for Dana on her staff report? Quick comment, Dana. Page 138 of the packet, Exhibit A, please.
Yes.
Item C, it indicates emergency services building shall initially be $775, and then in parentheses it has $446.
Thank you. Yeah. So that should be 446.
That should be
so if you guys want
446,
to
correct? Okay.
fix that, that'd be great.
And then I had, unless there's other questions of the council, I had a quick question just for my own knowledge, and this is a question either for Craig or you, Dana, but on page 187 of your staff report, we basically have the capital improvement projects related to the water utility included in that upper table, and it estimates about $21 million in current costs for capital improvements. It allocates a growth percentage to what can be applied from impact fees, is my understanding of this table. Can you just briefly explain to me what the amount in cost basis means, and does that is that $7.7 million the only amount allocable to the impact fee? Is that correct?
Correct. So impact fees can only be used for expanded services, can't be used to replace anything that we need now. So those percentages were discussed with Craig and FCS Group. Those are the same as what they were before, but impact fees can only go to cover the expansion of service.
Okay, so question to Craig, and I understand this was a policy decision the council made when we elected not to go with the maximum defensible impact fee calculation that came out of the impact fee study. I believe that was at $4,100. Policy decision of the council was to maintain it at the current rate of $2,241, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's the policy we're discussing right now, is whether we go to the maximum dispensable for water or stay at the existing rate. The original staff report and recommendation was that we reduce water. Since that report and that meeting, we've come to the startling realization that our capital costs for water were grossly underestimated, and so that's why we're now recommending that we maintain the existing number as we continue to work through some of those details with the water system and come to a more solid cost estimate for those projects.
When you look in your crystal ball in the 5-year capital improvement program that we adopted at the last meeting, I mean, obviously there's a whole host of water infrastructure related projects inevitably on the horizon that the city's going to have to pay for one way or another. to the tune of $21 million. From your perspective, by holding the current impact fee at $2,241, are we doing enough to plan for those future improvements, in your opinion?
I expect that we'll likely be back talking about this next year,
Okay.
and perhaps raising that impact fee for water as we get a little further in the design process for the water tank and the water plant expansion.
And the ability for the council to discretionarily adjust fees is within our purview, correct, Dana?
Correct. So, and that's the intent, is that I felt we needed more solid numbers before we increased to that defensible amount.
Okay.
Because we are in such a preliminary state of discussing the water tower versus wells versus expanding our water treatment plant, that I felt within the year, because we will be looking at paved trails next year anyways, that it would be the time to look at it. But yes, you can look at these rates anytime. It's just required to be every 5 years. Our intent, though, would be to look at these as soon as we get updated figures. And that's why when we got news that things were changing, we held off on the impact fees, because we didn't want to go down. If you go down, it's harder to go back up. If we stay the same, we can go back, we can go up, but coming back from a decrease is difficult.
No, and just for the record, I fully support keeping the water impact fee at the current rate. What I want to avoid, though, is in the future, when we do have these capital projects that need to happen next year, that we avoid placing that burden entirely on our utility through fees. That's
Yeah.
what I want to avoid.
I agree. And, I think right now with where water impact fees are, we have over $1.3 million sitting there. So I think we have some cash funding already, because we've had limited projects more recently. So these are projects that, we'll be able to address a decent portion of it. But again, as soon as we know more officially what those numbers are, I do agree we would be looking right at impact fees to increase them again.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Dana or Craig on her staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 18-38 as well as resolution 18-44, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony? Not seeing it, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and I would ask for two separate motions for both the ordinance as well as the resolution. Richard.
I'll move to approve ordinance 18-38, adopting amendments to the city's impact fee ordinance on first reading.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Michelle? We'll move on to item 6C now. I will need a motion for resolution 18-44.
Sure. I'll move to approve resolution 18-44, approving amendments to the rates and policies for impact fees assessed by the city of Whitefish.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hennon. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously as well. Michelle? Thanks, Dana. Thanks, Craig. We will stay with Craig and move on to item 7. We have item A and B on the agenda. We'll start with A first. Consideration of a request to establish one accessible parking stall on Central Avenue. Craig.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This may look familiar as to something you saw on the last agenda, and I apologize. I should have gotten this on with the last accessible stall, but I wasn't able to. So most of this staff report is probably pretty familiar, just a different location. We did receive a request from the office of Dr. William Farrell to designate one accessible parking stall in front of his office at the south end of Central Avenue. That's at 550 Central Avenue. The ADA Act basically does a lot to control and dictate what we need to do with new construction, but it doesn't talk a lot about existing roadways. So as we get these requests, we evaluate them on their merits and bring them to you as we see necessary. This specific request is to designate one parking spot on the north side of the accessible ramp, which is in front of the office. It's shown in the picture on the screen. According to Dr. Farrell's office, there are occasions when patients have not been able to park in front of the office and are not capable of walking far enough to use that ramp. The cost to install or create this accessible stall are approximately $100. That's for necessary signage, and then the street crew would be installing that signage. So staff has reviewed this request, and we do recommend that an ADA parking space be designated in the area shown on the screen.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? Richard?
A couple of questions, Craig.
Yep.
Should we be also somehow prohibiting parking in the ramp, at the ramp itself, and designating, or is that going to be part of the blue paint? What happens there?
Yeah, what we'll do, I should mention that this roadway is slated for, this section of Central Avenue is slated for reconstruction next year. And when we do that, we'll put some additional paint on the road that hatches out the ramp area and designates that as a place for a disabled person to essentially open their door and get out. So there will be paint that goes on the curb and on the road and hatching out the ramp next spring. We kind of missed our window for that this season, but that will be done, yeah.
And who pays then for painting the blue logo on the roadway and maintaining it? Is that a city responsibility?
Correct, yep.
Thanks, Richard. Further questions on Craig's staff report? Frank?
Do we need two there? Do we need one on each side of the ramp? I know there's only a request for one, and I hate to take away parking, but I'm just looking at this thing. Structurally, if we've got disabled patients going into this facility on a regular basis, you have one parking place, another one shows up, they got the same problem.
I spoke with the staff at Dr. Farrell's office about that exact question. They indicated that he only sees patients a couple days a week, and the occasions where there is a handicapped or a disabled person that actually needs that stall are fairly rare. The request that they made was actually to give them permission to have a temporary sign that they'd move in and out when they knew they were expecting a disabled patient, but I didn't think that was the best way to go, and so I think one stall will be sufficient for them.
Great. Thanks. Further questions? We'll need a motion. There's a recommended motion in the packet. Orion?
I will move to approve a request to establish one accessible parking stall on Central Avenue.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously. Michelle? We'll stay with Director Workman and move on to item 7B, which is our review and approval to proceed with the design of the State Park Road project. Craig?
Thank you very much. So city staff has been working on the initial designs of the State Park Road reconstruction project. This will reconstruct State Park Road from Lion Mountain Loop Road all the way to the railroad tracks. One of the highest priorities of this project is to enhance driver and pedestrian safety. That'll be realized through intersection improvements, some roadway alignment changes, as well as the addition of an off-street shared use path. We like to, at about this point in the project, talk to council just to make sure we're kind of on the right track, and that allows us to proceed with design and not get to the point where we're ready to bid a project and realize that we have a change of opinion or a difference in opinion or a difference in design technique. So we did hold the first public meeting a couple weeks ago for this project. It was on Thursday, the 8th of November, and presented the preliminary designs to the public. So attached to the staff report, Michelle's kind of scrolling through it, are a number of things. One is the first communication that we sent out to the public. The second was the announcement for the public meeting. And then in there is also the presentation that we gave to the public. So I'll just run through a couple of the major elements of that presentation, and those are essentially the elements that I'm looking for approval to move forward with. The first is the phasing and schedule. This is a significant project. It involves over a mile, almost a mile of roadway reconstruction where, similar to West 7th Street, where we're taking a rural cross-section with no curb and gutter, and we're installing curb and gutter and street trees and street lights and the shared use path. And so it's going to be a pretty significant excavation and construction project. So we will be phasing it in 2 phases. That allows us to control traffic on the 2 phases of the project, but it also helps to spread out the budget. The first phase will take place from Lion Mountain Road north to Haugen Heights Road. And we're anticipating construction starting on that next summer. So we'll begin some of the funding in fiscal year 19, and then the remainder of that will be in FY 20. We do not anticipate much right-of-way acquisition necessary for this first phase, which allows us to move forward with it pretty quickly. And so that's why we're hoping to get going on that next summer. The second phase of the project will be the following year, in 2020, where we'll be working on the job April through October, but we will not be permitting any construction to take place in July or August. This is the phase of the project where we'll be going from Haugen Heights to the railroad tracks, which is the only means of ingress, egress to a couple of different neighborhoods, but also to State Park itself. And so we won't be permitting any construction on that phase of the project to happen in the busiest summer months, being July and August. We'll also be requiring quite a bit of right-of-way acquisition in order to finish this, or to complete this phase of the project. The right-of-way gets as narrow as 40 feet down on that northern end, or up in that northern end of the project. And we're also hoping to accomplish some alignment changes at the 90-degree curve, which is going to require some right-of-way acquisition. That is not shown, none of that is shown on the preliminary designs, which are in the staff report. We're really right now just focusing on that first phase, which is Lion Mountain Road, Loop Road to Haugen Heights. So the city's approved transportation plan does call for this road to be an urban collector street, which is a 32-foot wide curb-to-curb roadway. It also, we talk about this project quite a bit in the Connect Whitefish Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan, where we want where we propose a shared use path. The plan specifically calls for a path adjacent to State Park Road when the road is rebuilt with resort tax funds to create a valuable connection to the Highway 93 trail and a key link to the Whitefish Lake State Park recreational loop. So that's what we're trying to do, or trying to accomplish with this shared use path. The plan recommends a 10-foot shared use path. However, there are parts of the bike ped master plan that talk about minimums necessary, and they call out an 8-foot minimum, which is what we're looking for on this project. City standards also call for landscape boulevards between the curb and the path. That boulevard is expected to be 6 feet wide. And so what we wind up with is an overall roadway from bike path to back of far curb that's about 48 feet wide. Bear in mind that some of the right-of-way gets as narrow as 45 feet, and so in order to excavate, construct, build, and maintain the road, we do need to acquire some right-of-way. So based on the work that's been completed to date, as well as the conversations we've had with the public, there's a couple of things that I wanted to bring to your attention about the shared use path. The first being, we are recommending that path be on the west side of the road. I think to date, most of our plans and most of our concepts have shown that path being on the east side of the road, but we've come to some realizations during the early design that are leading to this recommendation. First and foremost, the path on the west side of the road will not require local residents to cross State Park Road to use the path. We think this is a pretty important point as we look at the demographics in that neighborhood, or in those neighborhoods, and the number of children. We feel like having crossings of State Park Road at each of the intersections, Meadowlark, Lake Park Lane, Haugen Heights, would create a more dangerous situation than just having one crossing on the far south end of the project. Having the bike path on the west side of the road eliminates the necessity to relocate many of the dry utilities. Most of the dry utilities along State Park Road currently are on that western side. If we were to shift the road over there, we'd have to do quite a bit of excavation in order to construct the road, and most of those utilities would have to be relocated, which gets pretty expensive pretty quickly. We feel like the path on the west side of the road creates better separation between the homes and the roadway on that far north end. I think that's best seen on page 222, Michelle, if you can jump to that slide. So pages 222 and 223 show just sort of an artistic rendering. This is what engineers call artistic renderings of what the project would look like with the path on either side. So on the top of that drawing is the current conditions. Now, the home that you're seeing there's about 9 or 10 homes on that north end of this phase of the project. Actually, excuse me, they're just north of Haugen Heights, so these will be the homes on the very southern extent of the next phase that have driveways that come right out to State Park Road. If we were to build, so what we're proposing is what's shown on the bottom of this drawing with the bike path closest to those homes. It basically keeps the roadway in its existing location, although we'll be building about 14 feet closer to those homes with the boulevard and the bike path. But if you jump to the next slide, what you see on the bottom is what those homes would be dealing with. If we were to put the bike path on the east side, there's only about 18 feet of driveway between the homes and the new State Park Road, and so essentially we'd have cars backing literally right out into the road. Most of those homes, or most of those property owners do use their driveways for vehicle storage, and so at least with the bike path on the west side, it gives them a little bit more room to back up before they're dealing with vehicular conflicts, so to speak. So just a couple more things real quickly on that western bike path alignment. Doing that does situate all of the water main valves in the center line of the road, as well as the sanitary sewer mains on the outside of the wheel track. This is something that we try and do on each project, is look at where the underground utilities are and where the valves and manholes and above ground features of those utilities are, and we try and keep them out of wheel tracks. Putting the path on the west side of the road allows us to situate the roadway so that we're doing that. The path alignment on the west side will help us miss most of the above ground features as well for the dry utilities, telephone boxes, all the electrical transformers, things like that. One more key feature that I'll just mention real quickly, when we're doing streetlights in areas where people aren't used to streetlights, we're able to put curbside shields on the streetlights so it focuses the light into the roadway and onto the path as opposed to into people's windows. If we were to have the path on the east side, as is shown on this drawing, we would not be able to put house side shields, and so those lights would be basically going right into the windows of those homes. So anyway, enough on the bike path. It is our recommendation that we have the path on the west side, and I'm happy to entertain questions about that. Just a few more things in terms of the design. Stormwater management is a pretty big factor in this project, and so we're working on a number of things related to the stormwater system that will be built as part of this job. I've talked about the lighting. In terms of the budget, the current budget that we have in the resort tax CIP is $5.3 million. As we look right now, we're currently estimating between $5 and $5.5 million. So we're pretty much right on track when it comes to the budgetary expenses. So based on all of that information, I do respectfully request authorization to proceed with the design based on the preliminary layout that I've just presented.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? Richard?
I'm a little bit concerned, and I understand those arguments for putting the bike pedestrian path on the west side versus the east side. I accept that you've got so many driveways, and I don't know how many driveways you have to cross if somebody's riding a bicycle, for example. They're moving at a greater rate of speed, and people start backing out, and I see that as a potential hazard. Did that come up in your consideration?
It did. We haven't determined the exact layout of the road, but we're anticipating that we may have room, if not enough room to have bike lanes on each side of the road. If nothing else, we'll probably have sharrows on this road so that we can keep the higher speed bicyclists on the roadway. I see this shared use path on State Park being more of a walkway than a bike path, and I think although it'll be allowed for slower moving bicycles, or any bicycle for that matter, I think the higher paced bikes will likely stay out in the street, and so widening the road, adding the curb and gutter, and getting some paint on the road will help with that.
Okay. The other is, now that, well, when you look at the 6-foot boulevard, is that sufficient room for snow storage when the street is plowed?
Yeah.
Without compromising the snow on the sidewalk?
I think it is, yeah. The traditional boulevards in Whitefish are 5 to 6 feet. Obviously, we do have areas with larger boulevards. What we require in our revised snow and ice ordinance is that people keep 5 feet of their sidewalk or shared use path maintained regardless of the width. So even in the winter months, there's a foot or two, I think, on the shared use path that we'll have for storage. But in general, 6 feet does provide enough for snow storage, even on these wider roads.
And then who is responsible? Is each homeowner responsible for clearing the sidewalk, or is this going to be a city responsibility?
At this point, it will be the homeowner's responsibility. I think when the path is constructed, we can likely talk to Parks about whether or not they can add it to their route, but we haven't had that conversation yet, and so at this point, it's been presented as the property owner's responsibility.
Okay.
Further questions for Craig? We will need a motion. Or Frank, excuse me.
I'll express my bias once again. Why, in God's name, do we insist on putting streetlights on a place like this? All we're doing is adding a requirement for a revenue stream. We're increasing our carbon footprint. I just don't see the need or why we would add this to this project. And just because it's city standard, I think we ought to revisit that issue.
Well, you took away my first argument there. As we do resort tax projects, as we do city infrastructure projects, we do consider whether or not streetlights are compliant streetlights with our city standard are necessary. I think that adding the shared use path and opening this up as a more attractive and inviting bike and pedestrian way, the streetlights really are going to help. I think in addition to that, the addition of the streetlights and the street trees really add a more urban feel, and it helps to calm traffic. And so even though the roadway will be better lit, I think that the addition of those types of features helps to be a visual clue or cue for drivers that you're in a more urbanized area, and a slower, more controlled speed is warranted. And so I think there's a couple of factors that support the streetlights on this project.
Richard.
From a runner's perspective, during bear season to run at night, it's much nicer to do it on a lighted street.
I just don't, I appreciate that, Craig. Did you get any feedback from how many people attended your presentation? Did you get any feedback from the neighborhoods as to what their preference was?
I don't think the one piece of feedback that I heard about lights was from an adjacent neighbor on Haugen Heights that already had street lights. She heard about the house side shield and requested one of those for her property, but I did not hear any comments from the public on new street lights on State Park Road. I will mention that these will be LED streetlights. That our new standard is for a, I believe it's a 32-watt LED bulb, and so in terms of carbon footprint, you know, we're doing what we can to reduce the electrical consumption of the streetlights, and these will be LED.
Well, I think you have a sense of my bias. I really want us to examine it. I appreciate Richard's perspective that at night having lights on is helpful for runners. I just hate to see us add an additional cost to the citizens of this city to support lighting when, again, it just seems inconsistent with reducing our carbon footprint and reducing any potential for a violation of our own dark skies ordinance. The last is I'm just curious, why is there the need for curb and gutter on this street? Is that just because it's city standard, or is there some other rationale that we would want curb and gutter here as opposed to swales or other creative ways to deal with stormwater?
Yeah, I guess two reasons for that. One is, you know, creating that urban look and feel includes curb and gutter, and, you know, so that's part of the tactic for calming traffic, is creating a more urbanized look and feel. We do have stormwater management as a significant priority in this project, and it's really difficult to get the water to go exactly where we're trying to get it to go in order to treat it and discharge it at an appropriate rate without curb and gutter. And the third thing I'd mention, you know, just looking at these two renderings, you can see that the amount of space that it takes for a roadside swale is considerably more than creating an urbanized curb and gutter system. If we were to try and do this project with swales on both sides, we'd likely be looking at closer to 60 feet as opposed to 48 feet, and so it does really help to shrink up the amount of right-of-way that's required.
I like that answer better than the one on the
Forget the
lights.
first two.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. I really challenge you, Craig, to revisit this issue in terms of lighting, and particularly on a street in an area like this. And I'm quite frankly, I'm not necessarily a big fan of creating an urbanized look every place we put a road in. I just think that this city has enough room, and we have enough differences in settings that we ought to really examine whether or not the entire city standard package makes sense. And there's costs associated with doing that in infrastructure and everything else when we start talking about that. So we're spending more of our, what I'll call our resort tax fund, to support our streets than we might otherwise do, again, in my view. But that's, you know, so I challenge you on that basis. I really would like us to look at that a little harder. Because, and just as an aside, the several people I've talked to that are over in that neighborhood, their interest in streetlights on State Park Road is not high.
Okay.
Anyway, that's what I got for tonight. Thanks.
You know, I will just reiterate that, you know, what we're looking at here is the first phase of the project, which is up to Haugen Heights. As we get past the double 90 in State Park Road, that'll be a whole different phase. We'll be looking at actually having this conversation again as we get further. I think that northern section of State Park may lend itself more to a rural cross-section without curb and gutter. I mean, the subdivisions that are coming directly off of this phase of the project are already curb and gutter subdivisions. They have street trees and boulevards and street lights, and, you know, so I think we're really kind of matching the projects and the subdivisions that have gone in to date. As we move further north, north of Haugen Heights, or really north of Lake Park Lane, I think that's a another opportunity to look at the road profile and chat about it some more.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Craig, related to stormwater, when we were in the selection process, we discussed with RPA, where the stormwater that is collected would be detained or retained, and we had that one BNSF property in mind. Have we made any progress with BN on that matter?
Yeah, we have. We've had conversations with BN as well as the adjacent property owner, and it's looking positive in moving stormwater in that direction. There is a fairly significant stormwater pond that was created with one of the phases of Old Town as well that exists within this phase of the project that we're looking at potentially partnering with the subdivision to try and do some stormwater retention and treatment as well.
Okay. Secondly, putting my Whitefish Lake Institute hat on, it's my understanding, and Maria, correct me if I'm off base here, that Montana State Parks is perhaps has some concern with citing the aquatic invasive species check station at State Park just because of the traffic and congestion that resulted last year. It's my understanding that they're asking the city to consider an alternative location that would be sited on State Park Road. Is that correct, Maria?
That's correct. We have gotten that request during some public comment, and staff's talking to them to try to address what their concerns are.
With that said, if that's the direction that we may head, whether it's next year or 5 years down the road, an important design criteria or element that I think we need to start thinking about as we move into final design for phase 1 and 2 is the opportunity to locate that check station on State Park Road within our current right-of-way or within the golf course's, footprint. Are we considering that at all? Has that been brought up with RPA to at least start looking at that from a 10,000-foot level?
It has, yeah.
Okay.
We've discussed it with RPA. RPA is well aware of FWP's requests. We have a meeting, I think it's the first or second week of December, set up with FWP to continue that dialogue. We're also meeting with the golf course to chat about a few different things. As it is right now, the fence along the golf course, along the east side of State Park Road, is on the right-of-way line, and we're proposing to build this project with, I believe, about 4 or 5 feet of separation from that fence. And so there's by no means enough room within the existing right-of-way to build this type of a feature, but we'll continue to talk to FWP and to the golf course about the feasibility. I think it's going to be really tricky.
Particularly phase 2.
Yeah.
With the right-of-way acquisition.
No, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, well, as long as we're looking at it. Appreciate that. You do have a recommended motion on page 199 of the packet. Katie.
I would move to authorize Public Works Director Workman to proceed with the design of State Park Road project based on the preliminary layout presented in the report.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Hildner. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. Reluctantly, says Frank. And that motion passes on a 5-0 vote. Michelle? Thanks, Craig. You do have Adam's report enclosed with the packet. I meant to mention earlier, Adam's sick today and still recovering from his minor surgery. Any questions for Dana on Adam's written report? Anything else to add tonight, Dana?
I think I'd just like to remind the public that we are closed Thanksgiving and the day following. And for the council, Adam and I will be attending a resort tax summit with other resort tax communities next Friday in Big Sky. If there's anything that you'd like us to run by other communities, feel free to send me an email. It's a summit that we've often participated by phone, but Big Sky has really been pushing to get all the communities together to discuss what issues we're facing. So it should be a good meeting, and we'll report back afterwards.
Great, thanks. Have fun. We'll move on to item 9, communications from the mayor and city councilors. I do have the standing appointments to the Climate Action Plan Committee. Angie, I think you had left the meeting, if I'm not mistaken, before we addressed this item, or it was discussed in our work session, the need to amend the actual ordinance creating the Climate Action Plan Standing Committee. Adam and I discussed this at our work session. And that was related to omitting or modifying the residence requirement, and then also tweaking the membership composition slightly as well. He sent me a draft ordinance that I reviewed and approved, but I don't see it in the packet. So I am reluctant to make these appointments tonight until we... That was on the consent, excuse me. Great. Better look more closely next time. Thank you. I'll move on to the appointments then to the Climate Action Plan Standing Committee. Apologize for that. I will appoint Kate McMahon and Sierra McCartney to serve the 2-year terms, and I would appoint Ryder Delaloy and Casey Lewis to serve the 1-year terms. And I will need those appointments ratified after I confirm the city staff members' appointments, Karen Hilding and Jen Sybrandt as the 2-year term positions, and I would appoint Joe Page and Hillary Lind to the 1-year terms, and I think we agreed that Melissa Hartman would serve as the city councilor, and I will need a simple showing of hands to ratify those appointments. And that's unanimous as well, Michelle. Again, sorry for missing that on the consent agenda. We did interview for various volunteer boards during our work session. We're going to go ahead and make those appointments now, and I'd like to start with council appointments, which would start with the Whitefish Lake and Lakeshore Protection Committee. We have 4 positions two applicants for 4 positions. And we interviewed Herb Peschel as well as Peggy Bramer as our county lakefront owner. Is there a motion regarding those appointments?
I'll move to approve those appointments.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Michelle?
Iggy, could you verify which term you want her? Do you want her doing the ending?
The 2-year term, please.
2-year term?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. For the Architectural Review Committee, we interviewed Sean Lewis. We have 1 position and 1 applicant for a term ending May 31st, 2020. Richard?
I have a question. Do we have a residency time for that committee? In other words, do you have to be a resident for a certain amount of time before you can serve on that committee?
I'll defer that question to Michelle.
For the Lakeshore or for the?
For architecture.
Architectural review? Occurred to me.
He indicated he's only been a resident 90 days or so. Is that right?
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a last-minute thought.
That's a good question.
It doesn't state that in the ordinance.
Okay.
Is there a motion for the Architectural Review Committee?
I would move
Ryan.
to approve that appointment
Of Sean Lewis?
of Sean Lewis.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that's unanimous as well, Michelle, for the term ending May 31, 2020. We will move on to the Impact Fee Advisory Committee. 1 position open, 1 applicant for a 2-year term.
I move to approve Chuck Stearns, the Impact Fee Advisory Committee.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's unanimous as well, Michelle. Which moves us on to The Board of Adjustment, we have 3 position vacancies. We had 2 applicants, both serving a 3-year term. And last meeting, we reappointed Mike Kelly, our incumbent, and this evening you interviewed Steve Quinnell.
Who's also an incumbent.
Correct.
I'd move to appoint Steve Quinnell to the Board of Adjustments.
Second.
That was seconded by Councilor Hildner. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Which brings us to the Planning Board appointments, which are my appointments, but they do need to be ratified by the City Council. I would move to reappoint John Ellis, Allison Linville, and I would move to appoint Toby Scott and Whitney Beckham to serve on the Planning Board, and these are 2-year terms. And I need a simple showing of hands to ratify those appointments. And that's unanimous as well, Michelle. Councilor comments. We'll start with Richard.
We received a letter from Rebecca Skeldon with regards to a name change for Lost Coon Lake. It's something that we looked at, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. We had a committee of interested people. I sat on that for a time to look at the possibility of that name change. I think it's important that we do that, and I'd like to get that fired up again and see if we can't change the name. It's time.
Where are we in that process? I know Jen was working on it.
We dropped it when it became apparent that, and Frank, correct me here, but the county commissioners had little interest in it, and some of the residents felt like it was going to cause them too much difficulty to change their addresses on their deeds and titles.
Interesting.
But I think we need to get serious about it.
Was anyone on staff participating in that process?
It also is going to require a petition to the court to get it done. It seems to me that we've got a little bit of a problem because the lake is something I think we can get a consensus to get a petition filed and probably get that changed. The difficulty is going to be getting the road's name changed, not inconsistent with that. And I think there were some residents of Lost Coon that were not interested in just simply making the change because they just didn't want to make the change. It had nothing to do with anything else. Given the proposed name change for the lake that was proffered by the golf course a couple of years ago, it would be a significant change, but nobody would be confused. Lost Coon to Lost Loon. Okay, I mean, and as a legal matter, it doesn't affect your deeds or anything else because the legal description controls on all of that. So, and that's the same for whether there's ownership in a trust or individually. So, I think that's not necessarily a false herring or a red herring, but I think it's something that can be overcome, John. And I would like us to see if we could move forward, but it may require that we maybe enlist Angie or somebody to help us draft the petition because we'll have to go to court.
Is there a member of the council that would like to volunteer his or her time to kind of get this off the ground?
Sure.
Along with a staff member, perhaps?
I'll join Richard.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do that. I think it's time.
Thanks.
Great. And I do live there, so.
Great, yeah, that's right. Jen Franson might have some good background knowledge. I know she was involved as well.
She was, and I tracked her down a year after we started this thing to try to get, because there are some statutes that we had pulled and I couldn't find them, and I thought she might have them, but she didn't.
Okay.
But we'll see if we can get them.
Great.
Anyway, thanks.
Thanks. Anything further, Richard?
I'm sure everybody else is going to say the same thing, but I wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving and safe travels wherever you may go. Or if you ski up the hill, safe travels back down again.
Thanks, Richard. Andy?
Just a quick question for David. I just came up to when we were talking and when Wendy was still here about the Marriott Hotel and their lights not being dark sky compliant. My question, I guess, is does architectural review look at a lighting plan when those buildings come in? It seems to me that it should be caught before they put them up, and then we have to go out and tell them to take them down.
Well, they do, but we don't always see the exact fixture that they're going to use, until they install it. And so that's something that, they're supposed to be dark sky compliant, and we've already contacted them, and they're in the process of changing it. So hopefully we'll get that done, resolved pretty soon.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's just, maybe the architectural review committee needs to be, okay, you need to be dark sky compliant. Here's what the regulations are. This is what a dark sky compliant light is. So I hate to see somebody have to do something twice. It's expense and a headache for us. And so other than that, congratulations to Richard on running 100 miles. That's awesome. So his text to me after was, it wasn't always pretty, but I'm sure it was probably pretty good. Welcome back, Katie.
Thank you.
We had a short meeting for you just because we knew you didn't want to have to last too long. So and congratulations to Frank and Paula on their brand new puppy. So.
Who's home in a crate, right?
Who's home in a crate and maybe need to get out.
Thanks, Andy. Ryan?
No comment.
Katie?
Yes. All right, so I stood in for Chief Dial at the 911 Emergency Service Communication meeting, and it came up by the city manager from Columbia Falls, Susan, and Phil Mitchell, and I all came to agree that we need to have an interlocal meeting. And so they tasked me with reaching out to every municipality to set a date. What we had thrown out there, and everyone at that meeting agreed to, was January 28th, which is the fourth Monday of January around 6 o'clock. Location to be determined. Before I send the email out to everyone, I wanted to make sure we're on board so that I'm not just speaking for us. Yeah, so we kind of need a council to yay or nay participating in an interlocal meeting on January 28th, which is the fourth Monday, preferably at 6 o'clock. I was hoping Adam was here to see if we could even just offer up our council chambers, since it's so beautiful and big. But I can talk to him after he starts feeling better.
I think we can offer it up.
Perfect. All right, then we shall
Columbia
offer
Falls
it up.
hosted the last one, so it's
Perfect.
our turn.
We'll bring them here. Part of this meeting, if it will be included. It will be included in an email sent out. Part of this meeting is looking for a joint for a funding solution for 911, but it will also be an opportunity to add anything to the agenda that we'd want to discuss interlocally. So time to get your thinking caps on to see what you want to start talking about. Yeah. And then lastly, thank you everyone for your support. While I was absent, it feels good to be back, and I appreciate all of your outreach and help, so thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Frank?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
I'll reiterate, it's good to have you back, Katie. We're always functioning at a higher level with all of us present, and you add a lot to the discussion, so it's great to see you back in the saddle. Speaking of being in the saddle, I will be out of the saddle for the first meeting in December, and Richard will run the meeting, and I'll regroup with everyone at the first of the year, so happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays to everyone. Richard?
Andy just said that he will be gone in December as well. I just want to make sure we do, in fact, have a quorum available for that meeting.
Count on me.
Okay.
I'll check my schedule.
Okay.
That would be December 3rd.
Okay. Katie, Frank, Melissa, me, that's enough. Okay.
Okay, good question. Anything further from staff about the council? We are adjourned. Thanks.